Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for recognizing Angela Becker-Dittman on our team. She and I have worked together for a long time, first on my staff, and then when she joined the Energy Committee under Senator Bingaman, and then coming back to take this post as I took over as ranking member. So, Angela, I just want you to remember the saying, third time's a charm. So, I know the Pacific Northwest is great lure, but do appreciate your help. And I think that that statement about her being here today is a remembrance of what we really should be doing here. It's pretty amazing that we all worked together to pass an energy bill 85-12 out of the United States Senate with hundreds of priorities of members on both sides of the aisle, both on the next phases of energy, on land, on a whole variety of things, and yet we have not gotten that over the hurdle. Instead, today, we're spending our time and energy on this, on something that is a divisive issue, that there is not full agreement on, and it's only through throwing out regular order that this can even be considered. The Energy and Natural Resources Committee has been instructed to raise $1 billion, and at the same time, the Finance Committee is trying to increase the deficit by $1.5 trillion with tax cuts for corporations and millionaires, while they're raising taxes on 13 million Americans, including over 300,000 in my state. So the fact that our committee's contribution to that deal is about 0.07% of the Republicans' increased deficit spending shows that this is not a serious budget proposal. It's a cynical effort to open up the heart of the Arctic Wildlife Refuge for oil. And I am sure at the heart of it is the interest of Alaskans. Not saying Alaskans' economy doesn't deserve the nation's attention. I believe it does. I have made many recommendations and will so again today about how to help Alaska. But the notion that oil prices have fallen and a state has been over-reliant on oil does not mean that we should be destroying a wildlife refuge today. The MARC removes the statutory prohibition against oil and gas development, and it reminds me of the debate that happened when people wanted to establish the Grand Canyon. Oh, no, we can't do that, we can't do that. No, 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 we need it for all sorts of other things. Thank God there was stewardship in this country to preserve the Grand Canyon. Instead, the legislation before this committee would require that the refuse coastal plain be placed in oil and gas development. So it really does turn regular order on its head. Last week, this committee did not have a hearing on this legislation. That is the new regular order in the United States Senate. The Republicans in charge here, instead of working in a bipartisan regular order process, have now determined the only way that you can get legislation through here is by having hearings without the legislation, hiding the information from the general public, and then throwing it out, and then when you realize your own colleagues don't want it, changing it overnight, and then trying to rush it through in breakneck pace. That's the open process of the United States Senate. If you stand by these ideas, then you and your colleagues should follow regular order. The chairman's mark was circulated after the hearing, and now we're being asked to vote on legislation that is different from any previous Arctic drilling bill and has not been subject to a single hearing to help evaluate the impacts on this crown jewel. At its core, the chairman's mark would manage and change current law of the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and turn it into a petroleum reserve. That's what this mark does. It turns the coastal plain in this refuge into an oil field. Now, I'd like to submit for the record a letter from 27 different scientists and biologists who say that this is incompatible with the status of the refuge.
Will be included.
I'd like to submit for the record as well a letter from both Democrat, Republicans, and independent U.S. Senate Assistant Secretary of Interior, Fish and Wildlife, Parks Directors, and U.S. Wildlife Service, who also say it's inconsistent.
We'll include that.
And, Madam Chair, well, I'll hold on the other one. So what we're doing here today is just creating another avenue by sleight of hand in legislation to change the wildlife reserve, because we asked this question, how could it possibly coexist given what the purpose of the refuge is? So that's easily changed. We'll just change what the purpose of the refuge is. But in doing so, you are doing great damage to the wildlife and the habitat and the diversity of the area. This mark would direct the oil and gas program in the Arctic to be managed under the same laws and regulations as the Petroleum Reserve. That is despite the fact that the Arctic Refuge and Petroleum Reserve were established for very, very different purposes. They are subject to different laws and management requirements, and they aren't even managed by the same agencies. So by imposing the requirements, you just raise more questions than you answer. And we will have several amendments to try to clarify this and what we think is wrong with this mark. These amendments will attempt to return us to regular order, ensuring that the purpose of the refuge remain true to the reason it was established. The purpose of the refuge was to protect the wildlife that live there. It is amazing to me with the run over of the CRA that happened earlier this year. It is almost as if you want to run a newspaper ad saying, come and hunt in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge by helicopter, by gassing polar bears in their den. That will be the new way that you want to attract people to the Arctic, because that is what you are doing here. You are taking a wildlife refuge and turning it on its ear and marrying that up with the CRA that you ran over before on wildlife management is a whole new style and message. I guarantee you that is not what is unique about Alaska. That is not why thousands of people go there every year and have impact to your economy. They go there to enjoy the beauty and the wonder and the great significance that your state is. This mark is not done in compliance with environmental law, and it's definitely not done in compliance with what every other state and refuge does. Most importantly, I don't agree that you should manage the wildlife refuge as a petroleum reserve. So we will have many questions. For example, how will it work with the Fish and Wildlife Service being responsible for the management under one set of laws and the Bureau of Land Management being under another set of laws? What happens when there is inevitable conflict and all of these issues? Does every word of the MPRA law apply or just parts of it? How do we know which parts apply and which don't? How will the Alaska Native corporations within the Arctic Refuge be managed? Under what authority? So there are many, many questions here. But at the heart of this, I think it was best said in the letter we received yesterday from Jane Goodall. And that is, let us not add, quote, let us not add one more tragedy to the list. We have other sources of energy. Please, I beg you, please use your voice and your vote as a senator to protect the Gwich'in people and this American treasure that is the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, end quote. So, Madam Chair, no, we don't think this is what we should be doing today. No, we don't think this is regular order. No, we don't think it's right to manage a wildlife refuge as a petroleum reserve. No, we don't think that you're protecting environmental law or stewardship. And so we are very, very frustrated by this process, but I guess it matches in tandem with where our committee colleagues on finance are, and I know several people here are running back and forth between those committees, but I think that you should ask yourselves about a process that just continually runs over regular order and without the broad input from the public on a specific mark.